The Atlanta airport terminal erupted in chaos. Alarms blaring, security swarming, passengers screaming. In the center stood Terrence Washington, decorated Air Force veteran, handcuffed, bleeding from his lip. All because he'd questioned why his first-class seat was suddenly unavailable. His military ID still dangled from the gate agent's trembling fingers. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their skin color. The events you're about to witness will make you question everything you thought you knew about equality in America today. Terrence Washington woke up that morning with a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with the humidity blanketing Atlanta. The call had come at 3:42 a.m., his mother's health was deteriorating rapidly. At 45 years old, the retired Air Force colonel had faced enemy fire, navigated diplomatic crises, and commanded elite squadrons through impossible missions during his 25 years of distinguished service. But nothing had prepared him for the tremor in his sister's voice when she said, "Mom's asking for you, Terrence. The doctors don't think she has much time." By 5:30 a.m., Terrence had booked the earliest flight to Chicago, packed a small carry-on, and slipped into his tailored navy suit, the one his mother had insisted on buying him when he received his final promotion before retirement. A colonel should look the part, she'd said proudly, straightening his collar with hands that even then had begun to tremble slightly from the Parkinson's that now threatened to take her. The SkyNation Airlines terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson International was relatively quiet when Terrence arrived, 3 hours before his scheduled departure. He'd learned long ago that arriving early minimized certain complications. The ticketing agent, a young white woman with a nameplate reading, Kimberly, had been professional and efficient. "Thank you for your service, Colonel Washington," she'd said, noticing his military ID as he presented his documents. "I've upgraded you to first class. It's the least we can do." Her smile seemed genuine as she added, "And I hope your mother recovers soon." That small kindness had momentarily lifted the weight Terrence carried. Perhaps today would be different from those other times, like the random security checks that somehow always seemed to find him, or the flight attendant who had once asked to see his boarding pass 3 separate times during a single flight, or the passenger who had requested to be moved after being seated next to him in business class. As he made his way through security, Terrence maintained the ramrod-straight posture that 2.5 decades of military service had ingrained in him. He answered questions with, "Yes, sir," and "No, ma'am," removed his shoes without complaint when asked, and kept his expression neutral when the TSA agent held his passport up to the light longer than necessary, comparing his face to the photo with exaggerated scrutiny. Just another day, he thought to himself, the mantra he'd adopted years ago. The mental calculations were so automatic now he barely noticed making them. Speak softly. Move deliberately. Smile, but not too widely. Be twice as courteous. Keep all documents readily accessible. Never show frustration. Terrence settled into a seat near his gate, pulling out his phone to check on his mother's condition. His sister Vanessa reported no change, which was something, at least. He scrolled through photos of his mother, standing proudly at his graduation from the Air Force Academy, beaming at his wedding to Stephanie, before the divorce, holding his son Marcus at his high school graduation last year. So many memories, so much love. When boarding was announced for first-class passengers, Terrence gathered his belongings and approached the gate. The agent, a white woman in her mid-30s with a blonde ponytail and a nameplate reading Lindsay Parker, had been efficiently scanning tickets and greeting passengers with a practiced smile. "Good morning," Terrence said, presenting his boarding pass and ID. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Lindsay's smile faltered, her gaze flicking between his face and his boarding pass multiple times. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her tone cooling noticeably. "It appears there's been a mistake with your seating assignment." Terrence maintained his calm. "I was upgraded to first class at check-in. Is there a problem?" Lindsay's fingers tapped rapidly on her keyboard, her eyes avoiding direct contact. "Yes, well, unfortunately, that first-class seat is no longer available. We're experiencing a full flight today. Before Terrence could respond, another passenger brushed past him, a white man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Despite arriving at the gate visibly rushed and slightly disheveled, the man was greeted warmly by Lindsay. "Mr. Hughes. Cutting it close today," she said with a laugh, her demeanor transforming instantly. "We've got you all set in 2A. Enjoy your flight." Ethan Hughes nodded curtly, not even acknowledging Terrence as he swept past and down the jetway. Terrence took a deep breath, maintaining his composure through years of practiced discipline. "Ma'am, I confirmed my first-class seat less than an hour ago. My boarding pass clearly shows seat 3C. Could you please explain why it's suddenly unavailable?" Lindsay's smile tightened. "As I said, sir, we're experiencing a full flight. These things happen. I can put you in an aisle seat in economy if you prefer not to take a middle. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. But today, with his mother lying in a hospital bed possibly taking her final breaths, Terrence found it harder than usual to simply accept the familiar injustice and move on. "These things seem to happen to me quite frequently," he said, his voice still measured but firm. "I'd like to understand what changed between check-in and now." Lindsay Parker's fingers hovered over her keyboard as she avoided Terrence's steady gaze. The terminal hummed with the usual pre-boarding activity, but a small bubble of tension was forming around gate C-22. "Sir, I'm simply informing you of the current situation," Lindsay said, her voice taking on an edge. "Your first-class seat is unavailable. I'm offering you an alternative in economy." Terrence placed his boarding pass on the counter between them. "This boarding pass, which was issued to me less than an hour ago, says otherwise. I'd like to speak with a supervisor, please." A few passengers in line behind Terrence shifted uncomfortably. Among them was Morgan Chen, a 26-year-old Asian-American tech consultant. Something about the interaction caught her attention, and she discreetly pulled out her phone, opening the camera app. "Is there a problem here?" a tall black man in line asked, leaning forward slightly. "No problem at all," Terrence replied calmly. "Just a seating misunderstanding I'm trying to resolve." Lindsay's face flushed as she picked up a phone. "I need a supervisor at gate C-22, she said in a low voice. Then to Terrence, "Sir, if you'll step aside so I can help the other passengers, I'll wait right here until we resolve this issue," Terrence stated firmly. "I have an urgent family situation and was assured my first-class seat was confirmed." Within minutes, a white man in his 40s with a receding hairline and a Sky Nation management badge approached. The nameplate read, "Bradley Kent, Gate Supervisor." Following closely behind him was a security guard named Ray Diaz, a muscular Hispanic man with a buzz cut who positioned himself just behind Bradley. "What seems to be the problem here?" Bradley asked, though his question was directed at Lindsay rather than Terrence. "This gentleman is insisting on a first-class seat that's no longer available," Lindsay explained, emphasizing the word "insisting," as if Terrence was being unreasonable. "Sir," Bradley turned to Terrence with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes, "unfortunately, seating assignments sometimes change due to aircraft swaps or weight distribution requirements. We'll be happy to accommodate you in economy." Terrence reached into his jacket pocket and produced his military ID along with his frequent flyer card showing Platinum Elite status. "I understand operational changes happen, Mr. Kent. But I'm a retired Air Force colonel with top-tier status on your airline. I received this upgrade less than an hour ago, and I'm traveling to see my critically ill mother in Chicago. I'd appreciate transparency about why my seat assignment changed after I checked in, while other first-class passengers were unaffected." Morgan Chen, now recording discreetly, captured Bradley's expression hardening at Terrence's measured but direct challenge. "Sir, I don't appreciate your tone," Bradley said, despite Terrence having spoken calmly and professionally. "The decision has been made. You can either accept the economy seat we're offering or we can book you on a later flight." From the first-class boarding line, Ethan Hughes watched the interaction with visible discomfort but remained silent, occasionally checking his watch. "My tone is perfectly respectful," Terrence countered. "And I still haven't received an explanation for why my confirmed first-class seat is suddenly unavailable when I can clearly see first-class passengers still boarding." Bradley stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, we have procedures in place to ensure the comfort of all our passengers. Some seating adjustments are made at the discretion of the gate staff." The implication hung in the air, unmistakable to Terrence and to several bystanders who had stopped to observe the interaction. "Are you saying," Terrence asked deliberately, "that you've decided certain passengers might be uncomfortable with my presence in first class?" Bradley's jaw tightened. "I'm saying you're now delaying the flight and causing a disturbance. Either take the economy seat or step aside." Terrence stood his ground. "I'm not causing any disturbance. I'm simply asking why my confirmed seat was taken away without explanation." Bradley nodded almost imperceptibly to Ray, who stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to step away from the gate area." "I have a valid boarding pass," Terrence replied, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "And I'm being discriminated against. This is unacceptable." The moment the word "discriminated" left Terrence's lips, Ray moved with sudden aggression, grabbing Terrence's arm forcefully. "Take your hands off me," Terrence said, instinctively pulling back from the unexpected physical contact. In an instant, Ray twisted Terrence's arm behind his back and slammed him face-first into the counter. Gasps erupted from the gathered crowd as Terrence's lip split open against the hard surface, blood immediately staining his crisp white shirt. "Stop! What are you doing?" Morgan Chin shouted, her phone now held high, openly recording. "He's resisting," Ray claimed, though the video clearly showed Terrence had merely reacted to being grabbed without warning. "I am not resisting," Terrence stated clearly, despite the painful position. "This is assault." More passengers gathered, many with phones recording now. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, exactly what Terrence had spent a lifetime trying to avoid. "Call the police." Bradley commanded a nearby gate agent, as if Terrence were the aggressor. "And get those people to stop recording." But it was too late. Morgan Chen had already hit the live stream button on her social media account, and what had begun as a seating misunderstanding was about to explode into something much bigger. Morgan Chen's hands trembled slightly as she continued filming, but her voice remained steady as she narrated what was happening. "I'm at Atlanta Airport right now, and I just witnessed security assault a black man who was calmly questioning why his first-class seat was taken away. He identified himself as a military veteran, and they responded by slamming him into the counter. He's bleeding, and now they're putting him in handcuffs." Her live stream counter ticked up rapidly. 50 viewers, then 200, then over 1,000 within minutes. Comments flooded in, expressing outrage and demanding more information. 7 miles away, in downtown Atlanta, journalist Zoe Williams was scanning social media during her lunch break when Morgan's live stream appeared on her feed. As an investigative reporter who specialized in civil rights issues, Zoe had developed an instinct for stories that mattered. She immediately recognized the significance of what she was seeing. "Ryan," she called to her cameraman across the newsroom, "grab the gear. We need to get to Hartsfield-Jackson right now." She was already shrugging into her jacket, phone pressed to her ear as she called her editor. "I've got something big happening at the airport. Racial discrimination, veteran involved, physical assault, all on video. I'm heading there now." Back at the terminal, airport police had arrived, adding to the growing chaos. 3 officers surrounded Terrence, who remained surprisingly composed despite the handcuffs and the blood dripping from his split lip. "Officers, I've committed no crime," he stated clearly, his military training evident in his controlled response to crisis. "I was assaulted by this security guard after questioning discriminatory treatment by the airline staff." Morgan had positioned herself to capture the entire scene, narrating as she filmed. "The police are here now. The man is trying to explain what happened," but they're not listening. People around me are saying he did nothing wrong. This is happening right now at Gate C-22 on SkyNation Airlines. The livestream viewer count hit 10,000, then 25,000, climbing rapidly as people shared the link across multiple platforms. Among those viewers was Gabriela Rodriguez, SkyNation's junior social media manager, who nearly spilled her coffee when she recognized her company's gate and uniforms in the viral video. "Oh my God," she muttered, immediately picking up her phone to call her supervisor. "Victor, we have a situation developing at Atlanta. There's a video going viral of our staff and security allegedly assaulting a black military veteran who was trying to board in first class." Victor Coleman, SkyNation's 52-year-old PR director, was in the middle of a lunch meeting with advertising executives when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the message from Gabriela and dismissively texted back, "Handle it with the standard response. Investigating, take seriously, etc. I'm in a meeting." What Victor failed to grasp was that this situation was rapidly outpacing the company's standard crisis management protocols. By the time the police escorted Terrence away from the gate area, Morgan's original live stream had been viewed over 100,000 times and was being picked up by other social media accounts with massive followings. A passenger who had been standing near Terrence during the initial confrontation approached Morgan, visibly upset. "I heard everything. That gate agent changed his seat as soon as she saw him. He was nothing but polite, and they treated him like a criminal." Morgan interviewed several more witnesses, each account adding to the growing narrative of injustice. The hashtag Justice for Terrence Washington began trending nationally, fueled by outrage across political and demographic lines. The military community, in particular, responded with swift and unified condemnation of SkyNation's actions. Veterans groups began posting Terrence's service record, which included a Bronze Star and multiple commendations for bravery. His former commanding officer, retired General Harold Burton, tweeted, "Colonel Washington saved 12 lives during a rescue operation in Afghanistan. Today, SkyNation Airlines couldn't even save him a seat he paid for. Disgraceful." As Terrence sat detained in an airport security room, unaware of the growing furor, SkyNation's stock price began to fluctuate downward. Financial analysts noted the unusual midday activity, and several investment sites flagged the emerging controversy as a potential risk factor. Gabriela Rodriguez was frantically trying to contain the damage, but SkyNation's social media accounts were being overwhelmed with angry comments. Each corporate response, carefully worded statements about investigating the matter and taking all complaints seriously, only seemed to fuel further outrage as they came across as tone-deaf and formulaic. By the time Zoe Williams arrived at the airport, the situation had evolved from an isolated incident into a full-blown crisis for SkyNation. Security had established a perimeter around Gate C-22, but dozens of passengers were still milling about, sharing their videos and accounts of what had happened. "I'm Zoe Williams from Atlanta Metro News," she introduced herself to Morgan, who was still live streaming. "Would you be willing to tell me exactly what you witnessed?" As Morgan recounted the events, more passengers gathered around, eager to add their perspectives. The story was growing, evolving from a dispute at a gate into a symbolic battle against systemic discrimination. What do you think about how this situation is unfolding? Would you have started recording like Morgan did, or would you have directly intervened? Comment number 1 if you believe more people should stand up and record injustice when they see it, or number 2 if you think direct intervention is more effective. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see more stories about everyday heroes standing up against discrimination. But what's happening to Terrence right now as he sits detained? And how will SkyNation respond as their reputation crumbles in real time? The situation is about to take an unexpected turn. In a sterile, windowless room deep within the airport's security sector, Terrence Washington sat handcuffed to a metal chair. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his face. The cut on his lip had stopped bleeding but had begun to swell. Despite the indignity of his situation, He maintained the same composure that had carried him through firefights and diplomatic crises during his distinguished military career. Two airport police officers stood against the wall while a third, Officer Kevin Ramos, reviewed Terrence's identification and the preliminary report filed by the Sky Nation gate supervisor. "So you're saying the gate agent changed your seat assignment without explanation?" Officer Ramos asked, his tone neutral but skeptical. "That's correct," Terrence replied. "I was confirmed in first class at check-in. When I arrived at the gate, the agent claimed my seat was no longer available, though she had just allowed another passenger to board in first class." Officer Ramos made a note in his report. "And you refused to accept the alternative seating?" "I questioned why my assignment had changed," Terrence clarified. "I didn't refuse anything. I simply asked for an explanation and requested to speak with a supervisor." The door opened, and a female officer entered, holding a tablet. Officer Alicia Martinez was in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She glanced at Terrence, then did a double take, her expression changing. "Colonel Washington?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. Terrence looked up, trying to place her face. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, sir. You presented me with my commendation at Camp Buchanan in 2019. My brother was also in your unit during the Kandahar evacuation." The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Officer Ramos looked between them, then down at the tablet Officer Martinez had brought in. "I've pulled the security footage," she said, her professional demeanor returning. "And there's something you should see." The footage clearly showed the interaction from multiple angles. Terrence approaching the gate calmly. Lindsay Parker's demeanor changing upon seeing him. The subsequent arrival of Bradley Kent and Ray Diaz. Most damning of all, the unprovoked physical escalation by Ray, who had clearly grabbed Terrence without justification. "There's also this," Officer Martinez added, pulling up another video on her tablet, Morgan Chen's live stream, which had now been viewed over 500,000 times. The passenger who recorded this interviewed multiple witnesses who all corroborate Colonel Washington's account. Officer Ramos's expression darkened as he watched the footage. "Uncuff him," he ordered the other officers. "Colonel, I apologize for the situation. We were given inaccurate information about what transpired at the gate." As Terrence rubbed his wrists, Officer Martinez showed him something else on her tablet, news coverage of the incident that was already spreading across networks. His name and face were everywhere, along with details of his military service that someone had leaked to the press. Meanwhile, across town at Sky Nation's regional headquarters, CEO Dominic Taylor was watching the same footage in a hastily assembled emergency meeting with his executive team. At 58, Dominic had navigated numerous corporate crises during his career, but the speed and intensity of this one had caught him completely off guard. "How the hell did this happen?" he demanded, his face flushed with anger. "And why am I just hearing about it now?" Victor Coleman, the PR director who had initially dismissed Gabriella's concerns, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The situation escalated very quickly, sir. We're drafting a statement." Dominic interrupted. "The whole country is watching a video of our staff assaulting a decorated war hero. We're way beyond statements, Victor." The room fell silent as Dominic's assistant entered with another update. "Sir, we've just received word that journalist Zoe Williams is investigating past discrimination complaints against Sky Nation. She's reportedly received documents from an internal whistleblower." Dominic's expression hardened. "What documents?" The answer came in the form of Zoe Williams' first breaking news report, which an executive nervously pulled up on the conference room screen. Zoe stood outside the airport, microphone in hand, her expression grave. "I've obtained internal Sky Nation communications that suggest today's incident was not isolated but part of a pattern of discriminatory practices," she reported. "A memo sent to gate agents 3 months ago instructed staff to prioritize customer comfort by selectively upgrading passengers with certain demographic profiles while finding ways to reassign others." Multiple employees have now confirmed that this was understood as a directive to maintain a certain passenger mix in premium cabins. The camera cut to an interview with a silhouetted figure, voice disguised but clearly a SkyNation employee. We were told to use excuses like weight distribution or system errors when we needed to move certain passengers out of first class. It wasn't stated explicitly, but everyone knew what management expected. The whistleblower was Nathan Wilson, a black customer service manager who had been documenting the airline's discriminatory practices for months, carefully gathering evidence while weighing the professional risk of coming forward. Back in the security room, Terrence was finally released but faced a new challenge. His flight had departed, and he was still urgently trying to reach Chicago. Officer Martinez approached with an update. "Colonel, I've spoken with the airport duty manager. They've reviewed all the evidence and determined you were wrongfully detained. SkyNation has been instructed to accommodate you on the next flight to Chicago in first class." Terrence checked his phone, which had been returned to him, and found dozens of missed calls and messages. One was from his sister. "Mom's condition is worse. Doctors say hours, not days. Please hurry." The weight of that news, combined with the ordeal he'd just experienced, nearly broke through his carefully maintained composure. Officer Martinez noticed the change in his expression. "Is there anything else I can do to help, sir?" she asked. "I need to get to Chicago as quickly as possible," Terrence replied, his voice tight with emotion. "My mother may not have much time left." What neither Terrence nor the SkyNation executives yet realized was that this incident had struck a chord that resonated far beyond one man's experience at an airport gate. It had become a powerful symbol of the daily indignities faced by people of color, especially painful when directed at those who had served their country. The story wasn't just going viral, it was becoming a movement. The sleek conference room on the 32nd floor of SkyNation's Atlanta headquarters was filled with tense energy as Patricia Wallace, the airline's chief legal counsel, addressed the crisis management team. At 52, Patricia had built her career defending corporations against various lawsuits, priding herself on her ability to minimize damages and control narratives. "First things first," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "We need to contain this before it gets any worse. I've drafted a settlement offer for Colonel Washington, full compensation for his trouble, premium flights for a year, and the usual NDA to prevent further discussion of the incident." Dominic Taylor nodded, rubbing his temples. The company's stock had fallen 8% in just 3 hours, a loss of hundreds of millions in market value. "Get it to him immediately," Dominic ordered. "And make sure he understands that accepting our generous offer is the quickest way to resolve this and get him to his mother." Patricia's assistant hurried out to execute the plan, unaware that circumstances on the ground had already changed dramatically. At the airport, Terrence had been approached by Alexandria Howard, a prominent civil rights attorney who had seen Morgan Chen's live stream and immediately recognized the legal and social significance of the case. "Colonel Washington," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Alexandria Howard. I believe what happened to you today is part of a pattern of discrimination that needs to be addressed systemically, not swept under the rug." Terrence, exhausted and worried about his mother, was initially hesitant. "Ms. Howard, I appreciate your concern, but my priority right now is getting to Chicago as quickly as possible." Alexandria nodded understandingly. "Of course. And I can help make that happen without you signing away your rights. SkyNation is already trying to frame this as a misunderstanding, rather than acknowledging the discrimination you experienced." Indeed, SkyNation had released a preliminary statement claiming that the video didn't show the full context and suggesting that Terrence had become confrontational when asked to comply with standard airline procedures. This characterization infuriated those who had witnessed the incident, including Morgan Chen, whose footage clearly contradicted the airline's claims. More passengers began sharing their own videos and testimonies online, creating a comprehensive record that was impossible to dismiss. When Patricia Wallace's assistant arrived with the settlement offer, Alexandria intercepted it, quickly reviewing the terms. "They're offering you $50,000 and some flight vouchers in exchange for your silence," she informed Terrence. "This isn't about making things right, it's about making you go away." Despite financial pressures from his recent retirement and his mother's medical bills, Terrence shook his head. "I won't be silenced. This isn't just about me." As news of the settlement attempt spread, public sentiment turned even more strongly against Sky Nation. Bradley Kent and Lindsay Parker had been placed on administrative leave, but both maintained they had done nothing wrong. In a particularly tone-deaf move, Bradley gave an unauthorized interview to a local news station. "We have procedures in place to ensure all passengers have a comfortable experience," he stated defensively. "Sometimes that requires making adjustments to accommodate everyone's needs." When the interviewer pressed him on what "everyone's needs" meant in this context, Bradley became visibly uncomfortable. "I'm not at liberty to discuss specific policies, but there was no racial element to this situation whatsoever." This statement directly contradicted the internal memo that Zoe Williams had obtained, which specifically referenced passenger demographic management as a priority for premium cabins. Meanwhile, Sky Nation was working behind the scenes to control the damage. The airport authority, under pressure from one of its largest tenant airlines, attempted to restrict media access, preventing Zoe from conducting further interviews inside the terminal. Security personnel approached passengers who were discussing the incident, discouraging them from speaking with reporters. Nathan Wilson, who had taken an enormous professional risk by leaking the internal documents, began receiving thinly veiled threats about the consequences of violating his confidentiality agreement. Despite his fears, he continued providing information to Zoe, determined to expose the truth. In a particularly vindictive move, airport security, acting on Sky Nation's request, confiscated Morgan Chen's phone, claiming it contained evidence relevant to an ongoing investigation. What they didn't realize was that Morgan had already uploaded all her footage to cloud storage and shared access with both Alexandria and Zoe. When Terrence attempted to book a seat on the next flight to Chicago, he was informed that all flights for the remainder of the day were suddenly fully booked, a transparent attempt to pressure him into accepting the settlement offer as his only way to reach his dying mother quickly. Alexandria, anticipating such tactics, had already reached out to a federal judge for an emergency injunction to preserve all evidence related to the incident, including emails, security footage, and internal communications. The court granted her request, putting Sky Nation on notice that any destruction of evidence would result in severe sanctions. The corporation's systematic efforts to suppress the story were having the opposite of their intended effect. Each heavy-handed tactic only intensified public interest and outrage. Civil rights organizations issued statements of support for Terrence. Military groups organized online campaigns demanding accountability from Sky Nation. The hashtag boycott Sky Nation began trending alongside hashtag Justice for Terrence Washington. Inside Sky Nation headquarters, tensions were mounting. Patricia Wallace returned to Dominic Taylor's office with a grim expression. "Washington has retained Alexandria Howard," she reported. "And they've secured an evidence preservation order. This is becoming much bigger than we anticipated." Dominic slammed his fist on his desk. "Then find something on him. Everyone has skeletons. Dig into his military record, his personal life, anything we can use to shift the narrative." Patricia hesitated. "Sir, I strongly advise against that approach. Given his military background and the current public sentiment, attempting to discredit him could backfire catastrophically." But Dominic, feeling cornered and desperate to protect the company he'd spent decades building, wasn't listening. "Do whatever it takes to make this go away," he ordered. "Whatever it takes." What Sky Nation failed to understand was that their attempts to fight back were only strengthening the resolve of those aligned against them. As night fell, what had begun as one man's humiliating experience was evolving into a powerful confrontation between corporate power and human dignity. The morning sun cast long shadows across the plaza outside Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport as Terrence Washington, flanked by Alexandria Howard, approached a hastily assembled podium. News crews from major networks jostled for position, their cameras trained on the unlikely central figure in what had become a national story overnight. Terrence had barely slept. His sister had arranged for him to speak with their mother via video call, a bittersweet conversation that had left him more determined than ever to reach her bedside. Yet despite his personal urgency, he recognized that something larger than himself was unfolding. Adjusting the microphone, Terrence straightened his shoulders, the same posture that had carried him through decades of military service, and addressed the gathered media with quiet dignity. "I stand before you today not seeking sympathy or revenge," he began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "What happened to me yesterday is something many Americans experience daily, the assumption of unworthiness based solely on the color of their skin. The difference is that mine was captured on video." As he spoke, a remarkable scene was unfolding behind him. Dozens of veterans had begun to arrive, many in uniform, forming a silent line of support. Among them was retired General James Harrison, a tall, distinguished white man who had served as Terrence's commanding officer during 2 tours in Afghanistan. "I didn't fight for this country so that the very freedoms we defended could be denied to those who served," Terrence continued. "This isn't about a seat on an airplane. It's about the right to be treated with basic human dignity regardless of race, religion, or background." His words, measured yet powerful, resonated far beyond the airport plaza. Across social media, the video of his press conference was being shared millions of times, transcending political divides and touching something fundamental about American identity and values. Inside the airport, another form of resistance was taking shape. Nathan Wilson, still employed but increasingly fearful for his job, had become a rallying point for other Sky Nation employees who had witnessed or experienced discrimination. Isabella Martinez, a flight attendant with 12 years of experience, approached Nathan during her layover. "I've been documenting things too," she confided, showing him notes on her phone. "We were instructed to monitor certain passengers more closely than others, always with coded language about security concerns or customer comfort." More employees began to come forward, each with similar stories. What had once seemed like isolated incidents now revealed a clear pattern of systematic discrimination embedded in company culture and policy. Meanwhile, Morgan Chen, whose live stream had catalyzed the entire movement, was organizing passengers from the original flight. Despite having her phone confiscated, she had borrowed devices from sympathetic travelers to continue her documentation efforts. "They're trying to silence us, but we're not going to let that happen," she told a group gathered near Gate C-22, which had become a symbolic gathering point. "Everyone who witnessed what happened needs to share their account." When it was announced that the same crew who had been involved in Terrence's incident would be working another flight that afternoon, something unprecedented occurred. Passengers at the gate, now aware of the situation, began to stand up one by one, refusing to board. "I won't fly with an airline that discriminates," declared a white businessman in a suit, placing his boarding pass on the counter and walking away. "Me neither," added an elderly woman, who then turned to the gate agent. "You should be ashamed of yourselves." The impromptu boycott spread to other gates as passengers became aware of the situation. Sky Nation's operations began to falter as the resistance grew. Flight attendants and ground crew, inspired by the courage of their colleagues, began calling in sick in unprecedented numbers, expressing solidarity through their absence. General Harrison, who had listened to Terrence's press conference in silent support, now stepped forward to address the media himself. "I've known Colonel Washington for 20 years, he stated firmly. He has commanded elite units in combat zones, saved countless lives, and represented the very best of American values under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The way he was treated yesterday is not just an insult to him personally but to every person who has worn the uniform." Alexandria Howard, meanwhile, was working to ensure that the legal response matched the growing public movement. She filed an emergency injunction to preserve all evidence, secured affidavits from witnesses, and began preparing the groundwork for what would potentially become a landmark class action lawsuit. We've received over 300 communications from individuals who have experienced similar discrimination from Sky Nation, she announced. This case is much bigger than one incident. Zoe Williams's investigation continued to uncover damning evidence. Her latest report revealed connections between Sky Nation executives and previous discrimination lawsuits that had been quietly settled and sealed. The systematic nature of the problem was becoming increasingly difficult to deny. As the day progressed, Terrence received word that his mother's condition had deteriorated further. The urgency of his personal situation created a poignant counterpoint to the growing movement that had formed around him. He needed to reach Chicago, but Sky Nation was still finding excuses to prevent him from boarding their flights. In a surprising development, competing airlines began to reach out. Air Liberty, Sky Nation's chief competitor, publicly offered Terrence free transportation to Chicago in their premium cabin. Their CEO, Jonathan Reynolds, issued a statement. While we compete vigorously in the marketplace, some principles transcend business rivalries. No American, especially one who has served our country with distinction, should face discrimination when traveling. What had begun as one man's humiliating experience had evolved into something much larger, a moment of reckoning not just for one airline but for an industry and perhaps a nation. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and felt powerless to stop it? Comment number 1 if you've ever been in a situation where you wanted to speak up but hesitated. Or comment number 2 if you've successfully intervened when someone was being treated unfairly. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that shine a light on these important social issues. But how would Sky Nation respond as the pressure continued to mount? And would Terrence reach his mother in time? The corporate giant was about to face an even greater crisis as the full extent of its discriminatory practices came to light. The trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange erupted in frantic activity as Sky Nation's stock plummeted for the second consecutive day. What had begun as a troubling dip had accelerated into a full-blown financial crisis, with shares down nearly 20% since Morgan Chen's video first went viral. Financial analysts who had long recommended the airline as a stable investment were now issuing urgent downgrades. The reputational damage from this incident appears to be extending beyond the typical news cycle, noted one report from Goldman Stanley. Customer boycotts and employee actions are significantly disrupting operations, with potential long-term impact on revenue and market position. In the executive boardroom of Sky Nation's headquarters, Dominic Taylor stared at the real-time stock ticker with mounting horror. The company he had spent decades building was hemorrhaging value by the minute, and the crisis showed no signs of abating. Piedmont Insurance just suspended their corporate contract, his assistant reported, adding to the growing list of major clients distancing themselves from the airline. They cited concerns about aligning with our company values. Dominic slammed his hand on the polished mahogany table. Values? We're an airline, for God's sake. We move people from point A to point B. Patricia Wallace, who had been fielding calls from increasingly concerned board members, interjected with uncharacteristic bluntness. It's worse than we thought, Dominic. Someone leaked emails from the executive team discussing what they called passenger demographic management. They're extremely damaging. The leaked correspondence, now circulating widely in the media, revealed discussions among senior management about maintaining a certain passenger profile in premium cabins to cater to their highest value customers. While carefully avoiding explicit racial language, the intent was unmistakable, especially when combined with the directives given to gate agents and flight attendants. Dominic's phone buzzed with an urgent message. The board was calling an emergency meeting for 3 o'clock. The implication was clear, his leadership was now in question. Get me everything we have on this Washington guy, he demanded. There has to be something we can use. Patricia's expression hardened. I've already told you that's not a viable strategy. He's a decorated veteran with an impeccable record. Attacking him will only make things worse. Then what do you suggest? Dominic shouted, his composure finally cracking under the pressure. Before Patricia could respond, another assistant burst into the room. Sir, Diana Reynolds is on line 1. She says it's urgent. Diana Reynolds was Sky Nation's newest board member, a respected former federal judge who had been brought on specifically to improve the company's governance practices. Her call was not a good sign. Meanwhile, Bradley Kent had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Frustrated by being placed on administrative leave and convinced he had done nothing wrong, he gave an unauthorized interview to a conservative news outlet, attempting to justify his actions. "Look, we have protocols in place to ensure passenger comfort," he insisted. "Sometimes that means making executive decisions about seating arrangements based on the overall flight dynamic." When the interviewer pressed him on what flight dynamic meant, Bradley grew defensive. "I'm not a racist. I have black friends. But our primary responsibility is to our most frequent flyers, who have certain expectations about their premium experience." The interview was a disaster, immediately going viral and further inflaming public opinion against Sky Nation. Within hours, internet sleuths had uncovered Bradley's social media history, revealing a pattern of troubling posts that contradicted his claims of impartiality. Lindsay Parker, the gate agent who had initially denied Terrence his seat, faced similar scrutiny when her private social media accounts were discovered, containing comments that betrayed clear racial biases. One post from 3 years earlier showed her complaining about being assigned to work flights to and from historically black colleges' homecoming weekends. As these revelations piled up, the Federal Aviation Administration announced an investigation into Sky Nation's practices, focusing specifically on whether the airline had violated federal anti-discrimination laws in its operations. This unprecedented regulatory scrutiny sent another shockwave through the already battered stock price. Back in the boardroom, Dominic's call with Diana Reynolds had not gone well. She had informed him in no uncertain terms that the board was deeply concerned about both the incident itself and the company's handling of the aftermath. "We need accountability, Dominic," she had said. "Starting at the top." As the 3 o'clock board meeting approached, Dominic made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. He drafted a public apology to be issued in his name, acknowledging the unfortunate incident and promising a thorough review of company policies. But the carefully worded statement, crafted by the PR team to minimize legal liability, fell far short of the genuine accountability the public was demanding. The board meeting began with a grim assessment of the financial damage. Sky Nation had lost over $1 billion in market capitalization in just 2 days. Advance bookings had plummeted. Social media sentiment was overwhelmingly negative. Employee morale was at an all-time low, with a growing number of staff members publicly distancing themselves from the company's actions. Diana Reynolds, speaking on behalf of several concerned board members, did not mince words. "This isn't just a PR crisis, Dominic. It's a fundamental failure of leadership and corporate culture. The evidence suggests systematic discrimination has been not just tolerated but effectively encouraged under your management." The vote was quick and decisive. Dominic Taylor was removed as CEO, effective immediately. Diana Reynolds was appointed interim chief executive with a mandate to implement comprehensive reforms throughout the organization. Her first act was to fire Bradley Kent and Lindsay Parker, along with Ray Diaz, the security guard who had assaulted Terrence. Her second was to reach out directly to Alexandria Howard to begin settlement discussions, not just for Terrence's case but for what was now shaping up to be a class action lawsuit involving hundreds of potential plaintiffs. Most significantly, Diana promoted Nathan Wilson to lead a newly created Office of Diversity and Inclusion, with a direct reporting line to the CEO and broad authority to review and reform company practices. His whistleblowing, far from ending his career, had elevated him to a position where he could drive meaningful change. As news of these developments spread, Terrence Washington was finally on his way to Chicago, not on a Sky Nation flight, but aboard Air Liberty's premium service, surrounded by respectful crew members and passengers who recognized him from the news coverage. Despite his personal ordeal, he felt a glimmer of hope that his experience might lead to lasting change. What he didn't yet realize was just how far-reaching that change would be, or how his dignified response to injustice had sparked a movement that would transform not just one airline but an entire industry's approach to equality and respect. The Air Liberty Boeing 787 Dreamliner cut through wispy clouds as it approached Chicago O'Hare International Airport. In Seat 2A, Terrence Washington gazed out the window at the sprawling cityscape below, his mind a complex mixture of worry for his mother and awareness of the extraordinary events he had inadvertently set in motion. The flight itself had been unlike any other in his experience. When he had arrived at the Air Liberty terminal in Atlanta, he'd been greeted personally by the station manager and escorted through an expedited security lane. At the gate, a group of veterans, some in uniform, others wearing caps and insignia identifying their service, had formed an impromptu honor guard, standing at attention as he boarded. "Thank you for your service, Colonel," the lead flight attendant had said as she guided him to his premium seat. "And thank you for your courage yesterday. You've done something important for a lot of people." Throughout the 2-hour flight, passengers and crew members had approached respectfully, offering quiet words of support or simply a nod of acknowledgement. One elderly black man had gripped his hand firmly and whispered, "I flew in segregated planes as a young man. What you did matters." Now, as the aircraft descended toward Chicago, Terrence's thoughts turned fully to his mother. According to his sister's latest update, Catherine Washington was stable but very weak. The doctors believed she was holding on partly through sheer determination to see her son one last time. Terrence closed his eyes briefly, remembering his mother's strength throughout his life, how she had raised 3 children alone after his father's early death, working 2 jobs while still finding time to attend every school event and military ceremony. She had taught him the dignity and composure that had guided him through both his military career and yesterday's ordeal. The touchdown was smooth, the taxi to the gate efficient. As Terrence stepped into the jetway, he was surprised to find another small delegation waiting for him, local veterans who had organized through social media after learning of his arrival. "We've arranged transportation to the hospital, sir," said a young woman in an army uniform, introducing herself as Captain Jennifer Reyes. "There's a police escort to ensure you don't encounter any delays." Terrence was deeply moved by the gesture. "Thank you, Captain. I'm grateful for the support." The drive through Chicago's notorious traffic was indeed expedited by the police escort, the journey that normally took over an hour completed in just 25 minutes. Throughout the ride, Terrence checked news updates on his phone, still trying to process the national conversation his experience had ignited. Sky Nation's stock had fallen another 12% after the board's removal of Dominic Taylor. Diana Reynolds, the interim CEO, had issued a statement acknowledging systematic failures in company culture and promising comprehensive reforms. The story had expanded beyond a single incident to examine patterns of discrimination across the airline industry and American society more broadly. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Terrence was escorted directly to the intensive care unit where his mother was being treated. His sister Vanessa embraced him in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. "You made it," she whispered. "She's been asking for you all day." Terrence steeled himself before entering the room. Catherine Washington had always been a force of nature, vibrant, strong-willed, full of life. The small figure in the hospital bed, connected to various monitors and tubes, seemed diminished physically, but her eyes lit up with recognition as he approached. "There's my soldier," she said, her voice weak but clear. "Always fighting the good fight." Terrence took her hand gently, noting how fragile it felt in his. "I'm sorry it took me so long to get here, Mama." Catherine shook her head slightly. "Don't you apologize. I've been watching it all on the TV. You stood your ground, just like I taught you." For the next hour, they talked quietly, about family memories, about Terrence's son Marcus who was flying in from college the next day, about the lifetime of love and lessons she had given her children. But Catherine also wanted to talk about what had happened at the airport. "You know, this isn't new," she said, her breath labored but her mind still sharp. "When I was a girl in Alabama, there were signs telling us where we could sit, where we could eat, where we could even get a drink of water. Terrence nodded, holding her hand as she continued. I marched with Dr. King in Selma when I was just 16 years old. Got hit with a baton for my trouble. She gestured weakly toward a small scar near her hairline that Terrence had always known but never fully understood the origin of. People think those days are gone, but they just changed form. Got more subtle, but no less real. She fixed him with a penetrating gaze. What happened to you yesterday? That's been happening every day to folks without your uniform, without your medals, without someone recording it on their phone. They don't get justice. They don't get national attention. Terrence felt the weight of her words, understanding that his mother was passing him not just personal wisdom but a deeper purpose. Promise me something, Catherine said, squeezing his hand with surprising strength. Promise me you'll use this moment. Don't let them reduce it to one incident, one airline, one day. Make it matter for all the people who never get their moment. I promise, Mama, Terrence replied, his military discipline briefly cracking as tears formed in his eyes. As evening fell over Chicago, Catherine drifted into sleep, her condition stable but still precarious. Terrence and Vanessa maintained their vigil at her bedside, taking comfort in each other's presence and in the knowledge that, against significant odds, their family had been reunited at this critical time. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, the transformation of Sky Nation was proceeding with remarkable speed under Diana Reynolds' decisive leadership. The board had unanimously approved her emergency action plan, which included immediate termination of employees involved in discriminatory practices, mandatory company-wide training, and a comprehensive audit of policies and procedures. Nathan Wilson found himself elevated from whistleblower to change agent, leading a task force with broad authority to interview employees at all levels and recommend structural reforms. His first act was to remove the controversial passenger comfort directives that had served as thinly veiled cover for discrimination. Alexandria Howard's class action lawsuit continued to gain plaintiffs as more people came forward with their experiences, but she was also engaged in productive settlement discussions with Sky Nation's new leadership. The airline's transformation from defensive denial to proactive accountability represented a remarkable shift in corporate response to discrimination claims. The FAA investigation expanded beyond Sky Nation to examine practices across the industry, suggesting that what had begun as one man's humiliating experience might lead to regulatory changes affecting air travel nationwide. For Morgan Chen, whose quick thinking and courage had catalyzed the entire movement, the experience opened unexpected doors. Her citizen journalism had caught the attention of major networks, leading to job offers and opportunities to cover civil rights issues professionally. As Terrence sat beside his mother's hospital bed, watching her chest rise and fall with each breath, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him here. A denied seat, a moment of principled resistance, a video that captured the truth, and now a movement for change that had far surpassed anything he could have imagined. His mother stirred slightly in her sleep, and Terrence gently adjusted her blanket. Rest easy, Mama, he whispered. I'll keep my promise. 3 months passed like a changing season, each day bringing new developments in what the media had dubbed the Sky Nation reckoning. Spring had given way to summer, and with it, Catherine Washington had defied medical expectations, gradually recovering enough strength to leave the hospital and return to her home with assisted care. On a bright July morning, Terrence helped his mother into her wheelchair on the front porch of her Chicago bungalow. At 78, Catherine still carried herself with the dignity and determination that had defined her life, though her illness had left her physically weakened. Are you sure you're up for this trip? Terrence asked, adjusting the light blanket across her lap despite the warm day. Catherine fixed him with the look that had kept 3 children in line throughout their youth. I've been waiting 60 years to see something like this happen. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. They were preparing to fly to Atlanta, where Sky Nation had invited them to attend the unveiling of new anti-discrimination policies and practices, reforms directly informed by Terrence's experience and the subsequent reckoning it had triggered. Under Diana Reynolds' leadership, Sky Nation had undergone a remarkable transformation. Rather than dragging out legal battles or attempting to minimize the scandal, the company had embraced radical transparency and accountability. Diana had permanently replaced Dominic Taylor as CEO after the board unanimously voted to extend her position beyond the interim period. The flight to Atlanta was on SkyNation, a deliberate choice that both Terrence and Catherine had made, understanding the symbolic importance of their return to the airline that had been the site of such injustice. As their car approached Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Terrence noticed his mother straightening in her seat, her expression becoming more alert. "This is history in the making," she said quietly. "Not the big, dramatic kind they put in textbooks. The slow, hard-won kind that changes how people live their daily lives." The difference in their reception at the SkyNation terminal could not have been more striking compared to Terrence's previous experience. They were greeted personally by Nathan Wilson, now Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, a position created in the wake of the incident and reporting directly to the CEO. "Colonel Washington, Mrs. Washington," Nathan said, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "Thank you both for coming today. Your willingness to work with us through this process has been invaluable." Catherine studied Nathan's face carefully before taking his offered hand. "You're the whistleblower, aren't you? The one who risked his job to tell the truth?" Nathan nodded, somewhat surprised by her recognition. "Then I should be thanking you," Catherine said firmly. "Courage comes in many forms. Yours mattered just as much as my son's." The terminal itself had been transformed, not just physically but in its atmosphere and operation. The staff was visibly more diverse. New signage prominently displayed passenger rights and company values. Most notably, every employee wore a small pin with the words, "Dignity, Respect, Service," the cornerstone of SkyNation's new corporate ethos. In a conference room adjacent to the terminal, Diana Reynolds welcomed Terrence and Catherine personally. At 56, Diana projected both compassion and competence, qualities that had guided her successful navigation of the company through its darkest chapter. "What your son experienced was inexcusable," Diana said directly to Catherine, eschewing corporate euphemisms. "But his dignity in the face of that injustice created an opportunity for real change that we are committed to seeing through." The formal presentation that followed detailed the comprehensive reforms SkyNation had implemented, new hiring and promotion practices to ensure diversity at all levels, complete revision of training programs with emphasis on unconscious bias, elimination of subjective criteria for upgrades and seating assignments, creation of an independent review board for discrimination complaints, and unprecedented transparency in reporting diversity metrics. Nathan Wilson presented the most significant changes, his journey from vulnerable whistleblower to empowered leader embodying the company's transformation. Colonel Washington's experience exposed failures that had existed in our company culture for years, he acknowledged openly. But rather than defining us, that moment became the catalyst for creating an airline that truly serves all passengers with equal respect. Alexandria Howard, who had successfully negotiated a historic settlement for the class action lawsuit against SkyNation, outlined how the agreement went beyond financial compensation to require structural changes throughout the industry. The settlement establishes an independent monitoring body that will audit airlines' compliance with anti-discrimination policies for the next 10 years, she explained. It also creates scholarship and internship programs to increase diversity in aviation leadership positions. For Terrence, the most powerful moment came when Morgan Chen, now a civil rights correspondent for a major network, presented a video compilation of testimonials from people who had come forward with their own experiences of discrimination after seeing his story. "You gave people permission to speak their truth," Morgan told him afterward. "And in doing so, you changed the conversation about what we as a society are willing to accept." The day culminated in a ceremonial flight, the inaugural journey of SkyNation's newly established, Dignity Fleet, aircraft specifically dedicated to advancing the company's reformed mission and values. Terrence and Catherine were invited as honored guests, along with others who had played key roles in the transformation. As they boarded, Terrence noticed that Lindsay Parker's position at the gate had been filled by a diverse team led by a young black woman whose nameplate read, Jasmine Williams. She checked their boarding passes with professional courtesy, maintaining eye contact and a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Colonel Washington, Mrs. Washington," she said. "We're honored to have you with us today." The first-class cabin where Terrence had been denied a seat 3 months earlier was now the setting for a powerful reversal. He and Catherine were escorted to the front row by a cabin crew that reflected the diversity of the passengers they served. The flight attendant who helped Catherine with her seatbelt was wearing a veteran's service pin alongside his Sky Nation identification. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Diana Reynolds addressed the special group of passengers over the intercom. "Today marks not the end of a journey, but the beginning of one," she said. "The changes we've implemented at Sky Nation aren't just about avoiding another incident like the one that brought us together. They're about creating a company that actively contributes to a more just and equitable society." Sitting beside his mother, watching her face as she gazed out the window at the vast country below, Terrence felt the completion of a circle. From humiliation to vindication, from injustice to reform, the journey had been unexpected and profound. Catherine turned from the window and took her son's hand. "You kept your promise," she said simply. As the aircraft climbed through the clouds, Terrence reflected on all that had transpired from that moment at Gate C-22. A denied seat had led to a national conversation. A moment of resistance had sparked a movement. One man standing firm in his dignity had reminded a nation of its highest aspirations and its unfinished work. The story of what happened that day at Atlanta Airport would be told and retold, not as an isolated incident but as a turning point, a moment when one person's refusal to accept injustice rippled outward to create lasting change. Looking out at the vast landscape of America spreading below the aircraft, Terrence thought about his mother's journey from the segregated South to this moment, about his own journey from military service to unexpected activism, and about the longer journey of a nation still striving to live up to its founding promise of equality for all. The work was far from finished. But in this moment, watching his mother's proud profile against the endless sky, Terrence Washington allowed himself to feel something that had been in short supply throughout his ordeal: hope. Terrence Washington's story teaches us that individual dignity can become a powerful catalyst for systemic change. When faced with injustice, his composed resistance revealed the discrimination that many silently endure daily. True transformation begins not with grandiose gestures but with one person refusing to accept unequal treatment. This story reminds us that accountability must exist at every level, from frontline employees to corporate executives. Sky Nation's initial attempts to silence and minimize reflected how institutions often protect themselves rather than address root problems. Real change required confronting uncomfortable truths about embedded biases. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative demonstrates the power of community solidarity. From Morgan's decision to record, to Alexandria's legal expertise, to Nathan's whistleblowing courage, each person who chose principle over comfort created a chain reaction that ultimately transformed an entire industry. Catherine Washington's wisdom echoes throughout. Progress isn't always about dramatic moments that make headlines. Sometimes it's about the quiet dignity of standing firm in your truth, knowing that ripples from that stand might create waves of change for generations to come. What moments of discrimination have you witnessed or experienced that went unchallenged? Has someone ever stood up for you when you faced injustice, or have you been the one to speak out? Comment below with your experiences and share this video with someone who might need courage today. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that expose the reality of discrimination in America. Thank you for joining this important conversation. Together, we can transform individual moments of courage into lasting change for everyone.